Welcome back. Okay, so we have analyzed our materials and direct labor variances. Now we're going to look at overhead. And I'm going to present the information a little differently just so we can have more information. All right, so the beginning looks the same as what you've seen before, right? We have direct materials, direct labor, and we got factory overhead. And it tells you our standard for direct materials, 20 pounds at $2.50 a pound. For direct labor is 10 hours at $22 an hour. Factory overhead is 10 hours, again, because we're probably allocating based on direct labor at $4 an hour. And this tells you the standard in dollars. So that's how much is going to be applied. Our factory fixed overhead is 10 hours at $1.60 an hour. Oh, this is variable overhead. And this is fixed overhead. All right. And it tells us here this $5.60 of total overhead rate per direct labor hour, which is the $4 plus $1.60, so $5.60, is based on an expected operating level equal to, this should be level, not level, 75% of the factory's capacity of 50,000 units. Okay, so our capacity is 50,000 units, but our standard is based assuming we're going to operate at 75% of capacity, okay? That's how we set our standard, which tells you that if we end up operating at anything other than 75% capacity, we're going to have a variance because that's how we set our standard under that assumption. Okay, now we have our budget at different levels of capacity. 70%, 75%, and 80%. So it tells us how many units we would be manufacturing, what our labor was, what our variable overhead would be, and this is just going to be the labor times the rate. So this is going to be, if I were to go in and calculate it, the budgeted labor hours times the rate of $4 an hour for variable, 1.4 million. Okay, same thing. The fixed overhead isn't changing at the different levels of capacity, right? And I think we saw this when we did the flexible budget. The fixed overhead is the fixed overhead, right? Rent, a landlord isn't like, oh, well, if you're doing 70% of capacity, you can pay me less rent. And if you do 80%, you're going to pay more rent. There are those kinds of lease agreements, but not in this course. So, rent's not going to change. Depreciation's not going to change. So regardless of what level of capacity we're at, fixed overhead is always going to be the same at this budgeted amount. Okay. Then the additional information we have is during the month, the company operated at 70% of capacity and employees work 340,000 hours. Right, so if we look 70% of capacity, that means we built 3,500 units. Our employees worked 340 hours. At 70% capacity, they were budgeted to work 350 hours. So we know right there we're going to have some variances. And because the fixed overhead rate, this $1.60 an hour was based on a capacity of 7,500, we know we're going to have a variance there as well. Okay, but we're going to go figure out what those variances are. Then we have our actual overhead costs. Okay, so overhead actually ended up being different than what we anticipated, what our standard was, and so we have that information. So let's go to the next worksheet, and we're going to actually, we're going to calculate what our variance was, overall variance was, and then we'll switch to a new video to do our variable overhead variances and break those out, and our fixed overhead variances and break those out. Okay, so our actual variable overhead, it just told us over here, was 1,375,000. Our actual fixed overhead, it told us, was 628,600. Okay. This is our allocation rate per hour, right? Because remember back to like modules 3 and 4, we allocate or apply overhead based on that standard. So if we look back over here, it said our standard is $4 an hour for variable and $1.60 an hour for fixed. So $4 an hour here and $1.60 for fixed. All right. The standard hours at the actual level of production. Okay, so at the actual level of production was 70%, right? Because it said over here, 70%. And the standard hours at 70% is 350,000. So I'm just going to put the formula in here because I like formulas. I'm a nerd, and that's okay. All right, so if we applied overhead based on the standard at the actual level of production, then our allocation rate would be 4 hours times, for variable, 350,000. It's like I did a plus. $4 an hour times 350,000 hours, and $1.60 an hour times 350,000 hours. And our variance for variable is our actual minus our standard. A $25,000 favorable variance because our actual is less than our standard. And our fixed overhead, our actual is $628,600 minus the applied amount, which was $560,000, and that gives us a $68,600 unfavorable. All right, these are both pretty big numbers, and I want to find out what happened. Why do we have these huge numbers? I can add these up too if I want to see what my overall variance is, overhead variance, and it's 43,600 unfavorable. Okay. All right, so now we know what our variances are. We know we care. This is probably outside of our range. It might not be, but let's assume it is. And we're going to go dig into this further and figure out where these variances are coming from and who we want to talk to. But we're going to do that in the next video. So I will see you then.